Um, hello. So we are together here with the Fine Arts Reading Room. If you guys don't know what the Fine Arts Reading Room is, we are an alternative arts library in Concordia University on the second floor of the EV, which is soon, maybe not so soon, you can enter the space again. But yeah, we are delighted. And first, we'll acknowledge that the Fine Arts Reading Room is on unceded Indigenous lands. I know Nick is in Toronto right now, and a lot of you are elsewhere in the world. So just for land acknowledgement of where the Fine Arts Reading Room is, the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is the custodians of the lands and waters, and Tjohk'jā:ke is historically known as the gathering place of many First Nations, and we respect that continued connection with the past, present, and future, and our ongoing relationship with Indigenous and other peoples on Turtle Island. And a bit about Nick. Nick, this amazing person to my left, is a sax player, a pop star, a musician, an ocean scientist, probably everything else you can name. They are the lead of Big Buddy Band, and play with Fiverr, Special Costello, Aqua Culture, the amazing Beverly Glenn Copeland, Indigo Rising, and many others. Like, please correct me if I'm like missing the bands you're playing with. Yeah, and they are a member of Jerry Granelli's Creative Music Workshop in Halifax, and they teach music, and they are an amazing person. And I got to share some thoughts with them a few weeks ago about music, but also about our teeth, but also about but also just like how all these systems that we're navigating through each and every day are so like just like so structured and rooted in colonialism, even with like this whole navigating through the health system with our teeth, and stuff like that. And also just my background is not so much like music background, but I do have a background in design. So it's kind of like merging the sonic pasts of music with kind of like the visual poetics of design. And that conversation was really fruitful. So yeah, like really, really interested to have this talk and like workshop with you. And this is super informal. Please feel free, everyone, to jump in. It's like not a formal thing at all. So yeah, without further ado, Nick.
Woo! I'm glad that you said the super informal thing, because I was gonna do that. I was gonna have to be like, please, like interrupt me, or like, I mean, at least like how this would be, because I got asked to do this, I thought I would take the like experimental jazz approach of flying by the seat of my pants with it a little, because it's like actually just so much information, and I've tried to like organize it for myself really for so many years, and just like it's such a mess. And so it's always really, really helpful if people ask questions. And I also can look at the chat too. If you want, you can ask questions in the chat.
Yeah, we can like read it to you if you don't want to keep.
I would. Wow. so luxurious. And yeah, I think it's kind of cool because I spend so much of my time just like working in music that it's just like something that everybody deals with, like everybody's listening to music. When I go and look around my life, people have headphones on all the time. It's like a big part of everybody's life. And I just get a really cool insight into it because it's like all of my life's work is kind of surrounded around music happenings. And I think that there's like a lot of things that like maybe some musicians talk uh, about like what's really going on that doesn't really like make it to the public discourse about music. And part of why I really want to talk about it though is because specifically it just like now is like outside of just this academic world of wondering about like, oh, what's music all about? And I think just like really affects people who are trying to like work music professionally into their lives, where we just like always end up getting put in situations that are so whack. Unbelievable. Like everybody has their own list of stories, and if you put all those stories together, it's just such a bad scene. And like COVID made everything stop, and now there's a chance to kind of reimagine what that looks like. And yeah, so I guess I just have like observations from sort of like the front lines of music, and I'm kind of just curious to see what other people's thoughts are on those. um yeah, and so like I guess kind of like I have, it's also really funny because I wrote out all these notes, but they're like on this iPad that I'm talking on, so I can't see them, uh which is awesome. But I know that the first thing that I had was just this basic question for everybody, which is like, uh what is music? It's like it's such a weird. I could I think I could screen share my notes, but it's pretty embarrassing. You'd have to all see my notes. I don't know what you think about that. Um but yeah, okay. I mean, it's such an obnoxious and open-ended question to ask people, like, what is music? Uh, but I'm honestly, like, because I just feel like there are certain questions that are like so existential and fundamental to working in any kind of craft, and uh, it's a strange thing about working in music because I feel like I asked this question to people for like decades, and you just get like so many answers, and they're not unified often.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because like my name literally means music. Um, but it's also happiness. So like back in the day, I guess like Chinese people decided that music and happiness were both like powers of healing. So when you add like in typography, when you add a little like grass radical on top of my name,
Yeah.
it means medicine.
Wow.
So yeah, that's just a thought.
Wow.
Also, like thinking about what you said about the healing aspects, like I think there's music, there's like this community element to it that is about like deep listening to other people and like acknowledging their space and listening and stuff. But then there's also the commercial aspect of it. And these two things sort of butt heads in a way. But yeah, just the community aspect.
Yeah, so real. so real. And it's like kind of also interesting too, just thinking about like how like just the different like time spatial structures of this idea of music and how it's working, because like when you're talking about like music in terms of language, you know, that like even when we're just looking at the languages of the world and the cultures of the world, there's like the words for music are in so many different languages, you know, like it's like really such a basic part of civilization, of society, in all different kinds of types of civilizations and societies. And I guess it's like to me, I'm sort of interested in why that is, that there's like, even when we look at like the indigenous music of the world, it's actually so robust all over the world. And you know, people who are living in like seemingly disconnected communities are connected through like the like either linguistic or like sonic elements in the sound. So like what does that tell us about like how, I mean, there's just like so much information there actually. And then I one of the things that I feel like often comes up in certain circumstances when we're talking about music is sound recordings. Because like what the heck, what's up? Like we listen to recorded sound just all the time. I don't know if this is just me, but I do think it's a common thing going on. That like, yeah, and I mean, especially with the cell phones and like with the cell phones and the social media, I think it's like we start to kind of take for granted this whole history of sound recording, which and like so I a lot of the work that I do is in sound recording now. And then I was thinking about the fact that like, oh, it's funny that I work in this field, but I don't often think about like looking into its history. Like there's no way that that can be helpful for me. So and the oh yeah, and something that we mentioned in my my bio was that I'm a ocean scientist, which is actually true. It's a really strange thing. And that I studied oceanography at Dalhousie, like specifically ocean physics, and like the department that I was in was the ocean acoustics department. So then what I did was studied sound from like the perspective of physics, and like using sound to like look into the ocean or the atmosphere, for example. And for me, it was really cool because it was like just like a counter thought change perspective of way of thinking about it, where like instead of music being something that was like so important to me, it's just like actually kind of this analytical aspect of nature. It's just vibration. Like all sound is vibration. And we've been like uniquely as organisms just like selected to be very sensitive to the vibration of the earth. So many organisms are this way. Your ears are far out, like they really are. They're like likely one of your first senses. They develop way before your eyes when you're in the womb, and like babies can hear so much when they're inside of a belly. And you hear perhaps like it's the only sense that you have that's on 24/7. It's on while you sleep, and it is 360 degrees, and we're like constantly logging this information in sound, right? And we're actually taking on so much other information in the world, especially now, that we learn to take for granted this like skill set that we have, which is to listen. And so kind of what the practice of music is really about too is just like cultivating a way to listen. And like a way to like actually assess your listening skill. Like how much can you pull out of something that you hear, for example, right? And so I just think it's kind of interesting how being around sound recording has like changed the way that we interact with sound so like deeply, fundamentally, existentially. And then I have this question again. I want to cast my net out into the Zoom audience of like, does anybody know like when sound recording started in history and time?
No.
Does anyone want to just guess though? Because like you're not going to get in trouble if you get it wrong.
Age of, I don't know.
Yeah, the guesses in the chat are ranging.
Yeah, I was going to say, chat's rocking it.
Yeah. Are from early 20th to late 1800s.
Yeah, and so again, so what? It's like 2021.
21.
Yeah. Okay. So Laura obviously just looked it up, 1877. But it's also funny too because like, in 1877 there was like the most rudimentary forms of recording that were even still really poor. And when we're talking about like the recorded, when we're talking about like commercial recordings, like the dawn of this is 1920, you guys. So like we're in 100 years max of like, I mean, it's not entirely true because there was like 20 years of a commercial market around classical music, but nothing like what happened when they started to record American indigenous music. Like this changed the entire history. It changed like it changed the way the world works. It changed the way that art works, and it changed the way that language works. And yeah, I don't know. I guess it's kind of so that to me was kind of surprising that we're like within 100 years of sound recording existing. And then does anybody want to guess like what the beginning of music is? Or like where music started? When did music start in time? Yeah.
Before time.
Yeah, I mean, and in fact, like there's a, honestly, like a fun little exercise you could even try with your own brain. Can you even think of anything older than music? Like rocks, the sky. Is there anything in people that older than music? No way, right? Like life. Yeah, water. Yeah, like when we're talking about the earth.
In the womb. Did Nick freeze? All right, we'll just let them take some time to get back. But yeah, I was thinking like also just like linguistics wise, like you can actually look at someone's vibration like in their throats, or like just like linguistics in general, and you can like essentially like study their patterns in their throats and like study the way we make sounds like just by the vibration of viewing our throats, which was like kind of interesting, but that's like more of a visual linguistics thought. Yeah. Also, you're muted.
I talked to everyone's frozen face for like a whole minute before I realized. I was like, whoa, like I iced this room. Nobody's even moving. This is so weird. And it didn't occur to me that it froze. Can anybody tell me where I froze?
You said like what was older than music?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So like, so we agree that this music thing, and just functionally, basically for musicians today working, it's kind of an interesting proposition, right? So we're working with this thing, music. It's like the oldest thing you can even imagine. And then what we're working with this other thing, which is sound recording, which is like at its oldest 100 years old, really. And then when I'm thinking about like what dominates, like how we actually think about what we do when we work with music, it's like all around working with the sound recording thing. And like the sound recording has like actually become like the dominator, the monarch, the ruler of the music. And it's so fucking weird to me. It's always been really, really weird to me. And I guess it's just like taking me a long time to kind of figure out why. And now I kind of feel like I have some guesses. Okay. So like, you know how a lot of like the early sound recording was done to like wax cylinders, steel wires, things like this that were like really rudimentary. And then it wasn't until like, I mean, like where the explosion of all of this technology came from or I guess no, I don't want to tell you. I want to ask, does anybody know where like the where the like boom in sound recording technology happened? Yeah, tape. Hey, it's Jeremy. What up? But tape, but okay, yeah, so tape, but and then like when did tape happen? Oh, yeah, these answers, they're all, yeah, the chat knows. The chat knows what's up. Yeah, it's the Second World War. And the reason why it was the Second World War is because of submarines. Because you can't see underwater. And so when the Germans figured out how to build these submarine boats, they were like sinking all the other boats. Everyone's mad. And so they actually start developing this technology to like process sound as quickly and robustly and capably as possible, and then use it to see if they can find a submarine in the ocean, right? And so all of this whole development of sound recording technology is being created by the American military, the CIA, the Secret Service, of all of these like military agencies, of which don't just include, but are led by the Nazis. In no small part, this is like where all of the German engineering comes from at this particular time. And it's just kind of, again, just asking questions as somebody who works in music. Why are these people who are making weapons so interested in sound recording? Like, what the fuck is up with this? And oh yeah, okay, questions popping up in the chat. Here's part of what I think after working in this like kind of musical tradition and starting to understand like why music is so old. And okay, so the stuff that I'm going to talk about too, it just comes from my teacher. So I didn't make any of this up because there's no way that I could have. But just about the fact that music is like one of the oldest forms of communication that works. It like you could rediscover it if you found another life form simply by just, I tried to do this on Zoom once actually before. And like if I was in a room and I was doing this, we could synchronize doing it. Zoom makes it evil, man. And this is also proof too. Like this is also proof of why we shouldn't just be hanging out on Zoom all the time. So fucked. Because you can't like, for millions of years we could have sat next to each other. It's been like, and it would work. And from that rudimentary form, you can delineate time, you can delineate space, you can say like, okay, we're agreeing on this. Now what else can we agree on? And in fact, language cannot work without time. Like if I don't have an internal sense of rhythm when I'm talking, then my like it wouldn't make sense what I was saying. There's no way. Like we don't hear it, but it's rhythm that makes English work. It's rhythm that makes every language work, right? So like part of, again too, how musical institutions get passed on through time is by like having like keys or codes or infrastructure that works in a particular way. Like you literally just need to know it and you need to memorize it. And if you say that you know it, someone will be like, okay, let's hear it. And if you can't recite it, then you don't know it. And then in that kind of way, it offers you like a way towards personal accountability, because you can be like, yo, I know this thing. And then you try to do it and you can't do it. So you just simply have to admit to yourself that you don't know it. And it's cool. And you can try again and again and again until you get it. And part of what I think is really interesting too is segueing back from that back into this recording thing is, okay, so let's live in a world where sound recording does not exist. And there's a song you want to hear, but you don't know it. How can you hear it?
You play it, you ask someone to play it.
Yeah, it's like either, and those are the only two answers that I've ever come up with whenever I've asked myself this question, is it's like, yeah, either you know it or you have to go to somebody else who knows it. You just have to. And if the music isn't written down, if the music isn't recorded, then it's truly protected by the person who knows the song. And like if I'm like, oh man, I really want to hear Smoke on the Water, and then I like gotta go to the person who knows Smoke on the Water because I can't listen to a recording of it, and then they actually get to choose whether or not to share that piece of music with me. So there's that one level of consent there that is actually given to the tradition holder, which allows you to like actually use the music as a key in that one way. But then the other thing that immediately comes out of the thinking of like, oh yeah, if there wasn't sound recording, I'd have to go to somebody who knows the song, right? Well, if it's not directly one of your friends and you have to go to somebody who knows the song, what do? You have to go somewhere. And this is where land enters the equation in music. This is like right here. It's like, boom, land, somewhere. Like, where is the music? It's somewhere. All of the music that all of us like is connected to land. In the same way that all the shit that we like is connected to land because we live on this earth. But like all of these traditions are stewarded by people who are still here and have been practicing those traditions on a piece of land for forever. And that's why, in part, these traditions are so strong. And so the thing that the sound recording actually allowed to happen, And I mean, the example that I'll kind of use here, because I'm pretty sure people are familiar with it, is like the blues. Because pulling the blues out of the region of the world that it was pulled from allowed the story of this ancient indigenous artifact to be fucked with so hard. And that happening is what created this propaganda universe, Beatlemania, right? That we're still doing today. Everything today, it's just this Beatlemania. Like, so ridiculous. And it's funny too, because I part of why I wanted to do this talk was I was running this like little workshop called URL, where we were just like trying to get people to think about music more critically. And I posted in my bio that that I believe that the Beatles are missionaries, which I just think is such a funny take. I should tweet that actually. Because they really are though. They like, I mean, they really are. And even when I think of my family, like who grew up in Goa, like, and know the Konkani songs, like the music that's been there for forever, they also fucking stand around in a circle and sing 4-part harmony Beatles songs all the time. I love it. So my mom, every time I go home, she wants to play Beatles songs with me on the piano. Like, I don't even know what to say about it. I'm like, wow, they literally did it. They literally came here and made you be like, you like the Queen, the fucking Queen. Like, you're a Nazi. Like, you're the most evil fucking person to you. These boy missionaries. Anyway, so I wrote that in my bio because that's how I was feeling. And some white boy had the unbearable audacity to write me a whole email back about the Beatles. No joke. And how, like, calling the Beatles colonizers was not fair. Because George Harrison's a nice guy. And because the Beatles music is awesome. And it was actually crazy too, because I dig both of those truths as well. Like I love that shit so much. And I also, like, know a lot about the stories of the people and how they're involved. But I just think the colonialism aspect is just so important for our generation to stop perpetuating. Because it just doesn't serve music. And like, by just continuing the Beatlemania thing, it's like, I don't even think we know what we're doing. Like, we know it sucks, we know it's bad, but what's the real price of this shit? And like, I really think it was being able to break an unbreakable, because if you didn't have a sound recording of the blues, there would be no Beatles, there would be no Rolling Stones, there would be none of that. Because, like, oh my god, I almost just called them crackers. I was like, but they wouldn't, like, they would have had to go to Mississippi. They would have had to go and they would have had to learn that music, and they never did that, right? They just got it sent to them via their military. And then what did they do? They made friends with the Secret Service right away and got access to recording studios that were built without a possible shadow of a doubt by their militaries to do what? Create propaganda. And it's just, I'm such a conspiracy theory person that I don't know how to deal with the stuff that's just not conspiracy theory stuff at all. That is, you're like, no, yeah, it's like, and they're, I like the music, sure. It's just collusion with the military to create propaganda, to make people believe that the true story of who is on the earth is not the true story. Like, everything that's called pop music is just like, it's just, what I would say to my friends recently is just us all being like the directors of the Guggenheim or whatever, with these like stolen fucking artifacts, being like, I don't know where it came from. And like never doing the work to place it back in context. And That's interesting. I feel like I somehow covered a lot of the stuff that I wanted to, but I thought I was going to take like 5 times as long. Can I wait, I'm just gonna look at my notes. If anyone has any questions, just think about them. Okay, I have a lot more stuff to say, but I'm kind of just curious if anyone has any questions.
How do you feel about like the way English has evolved in music, like English as a language through music?
Oh, you know what? That's such an interesting question because this wraps into something else I kind of want to talk about that we talked about last time over the phone. Is like even just this whole idea of European classical music or like European anything is so confusing to me. And again, like I'm so embarrassed. I realized this last night that I want to talk all this shit in front of. I'm sure this audience knows so much more about this than I do, like sociology or anthropology. I'm like a real novice, but like what is European culture? Like it's like, and everything that they say that it's just like a tribute to Romans and the Greeks is just clearly the stuff that the Romans and the Greeks learned from Egyptians, learned from Kemet, and learned from like people who had been practicing like science, philosophy, mathematics, differential equations, music, had big bands, like probably went to outer space with their brains alone, like build pyramids everywhere in the world. Like nobody can make sense of how any of them were built. Like and then 1,000 years before, yeah, oh my god, just like, and this is all like 1,000 years before Greece, but then we're supposed to believe that like Europe is just a place where white people are. Like what in the fuck? Like how are people okay with this? It's so confusing to me. Like just like melanated people never crossed the Mediterranean. It was just not allowed, so they didn't do it. And for that reason, Europe is not. Anyway, oh my god, I'm asking. I don't know the answer. But one thing that's interesting to me is like even English and Latin like have roots that are so much older than what we are given access to, you know, like what people talk about regularly. Or I mean, yeah, it's like the history just stops at Europe in this particular way. We know it's older. We know that there's a melanated history to it. We know that that history like connects us to the way in which indigenous people are practicing in the world today. But like we were raised in a colonial history that taught us to be like the fucking brain dead. It's so weird. And so now we're like trying to reverse that and all the questions it brings up. So for me, again, like for a lot of time, I was like, fuck, I love music in English. I love all the Beatles and Rolling Stones songs. I want to write songs in English and sing them. But it's just like the thought of like continuing this tradition where everything is being recontextualized through this like European narrative just seems so fucked up to me. But then there's this other level too where like reclaiming actually everything that's like erroneously associated to like a particular type of European culture to me seems like really important. And because another thing that I've been doing is just like looking into dates. I studied engineering and science, so I never got the history thing until I was like in my 30s. And now I'm like, oh wow, it's the date, it's important. And like started to go back and look through what is called the canon of the history of music, right? Which is like, it's so crazy. We know again, like everybody in this chat seemed to agree that we know that music is like as old as time itself. And then you look at the history of music and it's like Europeans discovered music in the year 700, and you're like, oh. Honestly, I dare somebody to go and find a history of music that doesn't start with some fucking weird ass European music that is clearly so much younger than institutions of music that are alive today all over the world. Unbelievable. Every Wikipedia page. I can't even fucking kid you not. I looked at the Wikipedia page for just composers by year. Scrolling, all white, everyone white. Scrolling. Get to like the 1940s and stuff. You know who's not there? Duke Ellington, Charles Mingus. Like, I could go on, but I'll drive myself crazy. I was like, wow, this is crazy. You know who was there? Fucking shit you not, Frank Zappa. Good composer. And it's like, yo, like, okay, cool. Like, you guys are totally gonna do that and tell me that you don't pick who's a composer and who's not based upon their white skin. Like, that's mental. You literally left out 99% of the composers. And we're trying to like rebuild that now. And then even still, part of the crazier part about looking at that colonial history is it starts with like the medieval prehistory in European classical music. But by the time like Baroque music, Johann Sebastian Bach, like by the time like European classical music is like pulling itself out of its like its like, you know, its infancy, what is that called in the history of the world? It's called the Age of Discovery. So you don't have badass classical music before you had boats leaving, taking all this shit from the rest of the world that they called spices, everything spices, land, philosophy, mathematics, language, people, spice, medicine, well, I can't, everything. And yeah, and then so that's the history of classical music. It's entirely captured within the Age of Discovery. And, you know, like they barely talk about it. But even if you look at like Impressionism, Claude Debussy, he went to Bali. Part of what was at that time called French Indochine, saw the gamelan orchestras that were like thousands of years old, and then came back to France and reinvented classical music. And everyone's like, and it's so interesting because it's just this thing that happens over and over and over again, because structurally the music thing, the way that we're working is just built upon extraction, like everything else. Like, hey, we're in a settlement and we're all settlers, and the only thing we're supposed to know how to do is extract from our environment. So like that's the model that I feel like is given to people to work with in terms of thinking about music. Like, how am I going to extract music, put my name on it, make this thing that actually belongs to everybody mine? And like, I only really get this now because I'm working in music, but like where people make their money is from publishing and from putting your name on a piece of fucking music. And like, you know, it's cool. I'm not here to fight with musicians and make them feel bad for doing that, because everybody has to live. But like, you're putting your name on indigenous architecture, like for real. You even know where it comes from? What do you even know about it? Like, I feel like I spent the last like 5 years trying to answer that question, and I'm like, I don't know anything about it. I can point to a whole bunch of holes that I have in my understanding, and they're massive holes, like holes that should raise a alarm. But then it's just like everybody keeps like moving forward, working within that framework in a way. So hold on, I just saw Indy. Yeah, Indu, rocking it. Oh, and also, okay, so the interesting thing I was thinking about because I see people are bringing up Islam, and again, I also don't know anything about this, and but like Islam still is much younger than Egypt, right? Um, Wait, okay, now does anybody have anything, any questions or anything like that for me? I've been blowing off hot air for a long time.
I had a question, but this is kind of semi-related. Like coming from a more like structural background because you have like background in physics.
Mhm.
Like how do you think the history of music has, like, with regards to it being structured like on a sonic level? Like I think you were talking about like the 12 note harmony and how it's like there's like the forbidden triads.
How are you keeping me on track? It's so good. This is like, are you looking at, am I screen sharing my notes with you? Is my screen share on? As I tell
No.
you? Wow, that's awesome. Because that's like actually the perfect segue into what I was just blabbing about like getting stuck in this like Eurocentric type of perspective. That's actually just nonsense too. It's just like this weird a history that I'm sure you see in every other thing, where Europeans just like show up at the end, like 1,000 years after the story was told, and then pretend it's their story. And like we're actually out here like being like, yeah, this is their story. Ridiculous. And part of what was really helpful with me was that I got to study mathematics and physics as well. And that's like one of the places where I really noticed this too, because I'm like in engineering school and I'm brown, and like honest to God, like so much of my class was not European descendant people. And they 100% of in my math and science classes who they talked about were only like European mathematicians. And like that's where the history started and ended. Although they talk about the fact, like on some minute level, that like, oh yeah, in math, like the numbers they come from India. But they didn't do anything else there. They just came up with these numbers, and then they sat around like in a what? Nobody questions it ever. And it's kind of interesting too, because then the thing that you figure out about music is that since it's just vibration, that vibrations kind of like fit together in integer like relationships. So like if you take a wave at a certain frequency and you double it, it'll still intersect at the same points, right? So part of what's going on with harmony is just like actually the mathematical relationship between sounds in nature. And this is actually another really, really interesting element to come back to this like post-colonial discourse in music kind of thing, is that like the type of system that you're able to imagine is just limited by by your cultural sociological imagination. Like the reason that Western European music is based off of written music, it's the only music in the world that's based off of written music, is because Western European tradition is based off of contracts. And like that sheet of music is your contract between you and the composer that you're going to do exactly what the fuck you said you were going to do. And if you don't do that, then it's not the music. And it's kind of interesting too, because then we see like actually like so many other ways of solving these sonic problems, which is really just like, how do you organize a group of people to play music together? Because And I mean, this is one thing that I'm really heartened by our generation is like, we're kind of doing this ancient music thing again, where you just like get into a room, there's no rules. It's like, like until it's cool, and then you don't know why, but it's cool, and then it's like sick. And then what we actually have to do is rebuild the language from these bottom basic building blocks, you know, where it's like some stuff works, some stuff doesn't work. And part of the thing too about studying history of music is so cool is, without a doubt, you have people disparately all around the world like trying to solve this same musical problem and coming to eerily similar conclusions. The chord structures that we call the blues appear literally everywhere in the world throughout all time, because all that it is just you do something and you do it again, and then you do it differently, and then you do it that same way again. Like, and but part of too where this gets really fucked is like you know how we're working with like 12 tone system music where there's like 12 notes. Does anybody know where that comes from? Chat, I'm looking at you, chat.
Pythagoras?
Wait, did you say it?
Yes.
Pythagoras?
Yes.
Yeah, it's Pythagoras. Yeah, so the same dude who came up with the triangle. Can you do it? Yeah. And it was the same thing too. He's like obsessed. This dude's obsessed with like these triangles and the ratios that they make, and he's like, there's got to be 12. 12 is a circle, and then they, you know, decide on that framework and then project it onto absolutely everything else. And then here we are 400 years later, like replicating this thing. We don't even really get why. And now again too, this is just this really beautiful part of us living in a place in the world where like our ancestors come from everywhere, and now we're like all here with our ancestors' different shit. And like it's crazy to see the amount of different ways that people know, even in their own families, that we could be approaching this organization of sound problem. Like, how do you get together in a group and make music work? Like, how do you delineate the authority system in your like little arrangement? Who is the boss? Is there a boss? Like, and if not, like, how does that work? And it's also really amazing too, because this whole thing that we're calling like Black American music, jazz music, it's evidence that there's another completely separate sociographic system, like in America, that's not this settlement, because there's a totally different way of people relating to each other that can create this thing that we now just call the band. And there's bands everywhere. I gotta work on my punctuation. gotta get a stronger period. Okay, wait. Any more questions for me? Comments?
It was also like, I feel like I'm like everyone else, feel free to jump in anytime. But also I was thinking about like the kind of like aspects of how K-pop came to be as well. And this like super structured, like kind of boot camp military style of entering this system where it's like literally a boot camp of like who ends up first out of millions of people.
Yeah.
And then you sign a contract
And they're all
They're all what?
They're all children, right?
Yeah, they're all children, like age 12 and 13. And then when you come out of it, you're literally like uh, your whole like coming of age was taken away by like years of um like nonstop training, and then you're like 20 years old, and then you're like you end up at the top of your 1 million competitors, and then you're like, okay, finally I'm gonna debut, and then you sign this like forever contract with your company.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a say about that. And it's so it is so much a part again too about this the necessity of naming it as colonialism, and specifically like the colonialism that happened in America, because like, and also too, I mean, like, again, I'm just going to say something that maybe everybody is aware of, but that this is the man thing. Like, this is really like what this like patriarchal aspect to social organization like allowed to like intercept and fuck up this practice. Because like part of what made the music so important was that there were tradition holders, and like you just couldn't fake being Aretha Franklin. There was just simply no way for you to do that. And like actually, in fact, there were so many millions of people that faked to be Aretha Franklin. Millions. We can like actually go back and look at this tradition and watch them do it. They look like fools. They're a chain of fools. And like, but it's interesting now that even with time looking back, that you can see that none of them actually succeeded in lifting from that tradition. And you can know for sure that if it wasn't for those recordings, they would have nothing. They would still be singing in the style of their ancestors. Like the recordings were really what allowed people to lift that, right? And so what the recording industry really did was like the recording industry was invented to like remove the matriarchs from this tradition, because like there's like such a stark shift in the history of how these musical systems work when the recording happens, because it's when the recording happens that you see all of these men like rise to prominence in blues music, in teaching, and all of these kinds of aspects where they truly weren't before. And again, if you go and look back to all of these great artists, I'm fortunate because I've had the time to really do this research. But there are hundreds of hidden matriarchs in the American music tradition alone, to the point that it is so genuinely alarming. And like I'm if you have a pen and a paper, I would write down the name Johnny May Matthews and go and look this name up, Johnny May Matthews. And it's totally one of the most unbelievable stories to me ever, because this person trained the Supremes, the Temptations. She gave James Jamerson his first bass. She is Detroit. Like, she created Motown as individuals when they were all children. She trained them all to be the best musicians in the world. Because the one question that nobody can answer in all of these like high-fangled Motown docs is where the music came from. They can tell you where the kids came from. They can tell you how the money went around. They can tell you who did what when, but they can't tell you how all those kids figured out how to make such fucking good music and sing. How did they all learn how to sing? They just made it up? They were just naturally talented? Easy answer. For sure, it's an easy answer. Could it be because there's a teacher in their community that nobody wants to shout out? Like, I don't know. It could be that. There's a lot of evidence that it is, in fact, that in this case. And it's really interesting, too, because in the case of Motown, Berry Gordy was Johnny May Matthews' student. Johnny May Matthews is the first woman to ever run a record label in America. And so she started a record label before Motown. She trained Berry Gordy, who became the president of Motown. He started Motown with money he got from the mob, and he took all of her students and signed them up to contracts when they were children and took all of the money that they should have made. Stevie Wonder, I only found so recently, didn't make $1 until he was 21 years old. So what has he done in this time? You are like, For Once in My Life, My Cherie Amour, Signed, Sealed, Delivered, not $1. And it's all too what's going on is this like colonial extraction mentality where you have a natural resource, which is the music. It needs to be protected. And the way that it's protected is that you upkeep the authority structure in it. That's the only thing you have to do. It's like, hey, you have to learn this song. And you're like, oh, I love music, but I didn't learn that song yet. And it's like, well, there won't be songs if you keep not learning it. That's how it would be if there was no recording. So that was the impetus, right? To keep the songs. And like what we did that has fucked us so bad is that instead of recording the music to our actual DNA, we were just happy with it being recorded to a sound recording on physical tape or whatever. And then slowly we were happy with it just being recorded into a computer that could turn off and never turn on again. Like if all the computers shut off today, what would y'all do about your music? Even if I said that to people 5 years ago, people still had MP3s of stuff. I'd have to go dig out an old hard drive to find it. It's just like every 5 years it gets more and more stupid. And I only got hip to any of this because of Prince. Because Prince was like trying his hardest to let people know throughout his whole life. And they'll still only play Kiss on the radio. But the rest of it, they won't play. And they won't tell you anything that he was talking about. Like, and it was all to do this thing, right? To cherry pick this narrative and like remove the true tradition holders. Because also, I don't know. And like sort of back to this whole K-pop thing, right? It's like, and this is like kind of what I think about Kanye West a lot in this way, because I really love Kanye. Just as a person who deserves respect. Like, and just that they like signed these contracts where people lose the rights to their work, you know. I mean, like, and what, like, the contracts are modeled after treaties. Like, it is about taking your ancestral gift and cleaving you from the fruits of it. And like that's like also why it's always about children in the music thing, because like children don't have the agency to do this. It's like they're all kids. Always. Like I don't know too if like does anybody go and watch Justin Bieber's interviews these days? Because I can't, like, it's so fucked up. He's like, they interviewed him and the last thing I saw him say was he's like, I hope that nobody goes through what I went through, which seems like a crazy thing to say for like a billionaire, millionaire, multimillionaire person to say. But like you wouldn't let a child work under those conditions for another job. Like, and back to the Kanye thing too, and like kind of how this has to do with me. I just got really lucky that I met a teacher when I was in my 20s instead of meeting like a record exec, because that my teacher was like, you suck and you don't know anything. And I'm sure a record exec would have been like, you're amazing, let me have 75%. forever. And Kanye West too, you know, like, I don't know if anybody watched this. He was like, Universal won't sell me back my masters because they know I can afford whatever they want. They won't even tell me. And so for 6 months, he was like, just tell me how much you want for my masters. Just tell me. Just tell me the number. Just tell me, please. I'll pay anything you want. I want my work back. And they wouldn't even tell him. They wouldn't even tell him what it was worth, you know? And again, when we're talking about resource extraction, like, how much resource has been extracted from Louisiana, Houston, New Orleans, like Detroit, Chicago, you know? Like, what? You want to be like extracting resources from communities like this through, like, if all the music made from the blues, or if all the music, if all of the money in the economic system that was raised because of the blues, because of jazz, because of hip hop, was to be taxed to even some small percentage, and have that percentage be kept to the restoration of the land and the culture with which it came from, there'd be like freaking gold skyscrapers in Mississippi. Trillions and trillions of dollars created from music in the last 100 years. Unless somebody asks me a question, I'm just gonna keep getting more hyper. Like,
I like do have a question actually. I have like 8 questions actually, but I'll keep it to the, I guess, like most relevant. Yeah, I guess, like, you know, when, like, in this kind of in what you're speaking about now, kind of like looking at as like music and musical knowledge as a resource, like when we typically think about like resources and like stewardship, you know, especially kind of like the, you know, the conversations about you know, water is life, for example, really being you know, an example of you know, the stewardship of a community over land and a particular resource. And I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, to you, what would kind of giving what would like sovereignty over music look like for you, like for communities, or kind of like what are like what kind of opportunities can people take, or what kind of structures can people build towards that would be structures of like sovereignty rather than extraction?
wow, what a fucking awesome question. I have like a blunt and certain answer to it. Do you want it? I think it would just be that everyone would have to delete all the sound recording that they have, like, and really give it up. Like, and because like what you're talking about in terms of sovereignty, cultural sovereignty, it fundamentally will exist in music. It's like actually one of the most robust ways of delineating cultural sovereignty, because like you can learn it, you know, like, and you can't learn it if you can't be in that space. And if you know it, like somebody can ask you, like, did you go down to that place? And you're like, yeah, I went. Yeah, I went. They're like, play me the song from there. And you can't do it, then you can't show, you know, that. And I'm so like at a rudimentary place in my understanding of like trying to build this whole idea, but I'm only understanding that because the more that I'm interacting with like indigenous artists and like seeing how the like seeing how music functions in cultural society outside of settlement, I'm like, oh fuck, I'm right. Like that's crazy. Like I see it. I can see evidence of it in what is like the so-called jazz music, the so-called American music in that way. But like you can see the entire Great Migration through the way in which this blues is developed across America. And for someone like me, where I just like read Malcolm X and like there's so little information about the people who he's talking about, at least when I first read that, I was like, what? But the music is evidence that he's like it's such robust evidence that this happened, these people are here, these movements like this is real, this is the real story of America. So yeah.
What do you think about like efforts to like archive oral histories using recording technology? Kind of like do you see that as like a positive thing, or do you think that like kind of like liveness and like the orality of oral history should be like maintained at all costs?
Oh, but it's because it's also really interesting too, and with this conversation about the sovereignty in these art forms, they're being practiced today 100%, especially in places like India, where again I know very little about it, but I know that like there are cultural institutions, musical institutions, oral history practices that have like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of tenure. And it's just kind of really interesting what I've noticed has happened. Is anyone familiar with who Art Tatum is? And it's interesting, another thing that would be just totally worth just typing in and looking up is Art Tatum. Because it's just this thing, it doesn't make any sense. Like there's nothing that you could ever interact with today that could give you a felt sense for what it would be like to experience someone like Art Tatum. And this is happening with no electricity, with no computers, but just with a person and their body and the piano instrument as it is, you know, for everybody. And just like seeing the erosion in the capacity for musicians that I know to remember long phrases, like to just use this as a storehouse. And there's so much evidence. Even when like I started watching some of those piano concertos where it's like somebody will sit at a piano and play again, an orchestra will play along for like 45 whole minutes. And now when I watch it, I'm like, oh my God, like how are you not gonna fuck up? They don't have a paper in front of them. Like, I don't really get it. Like, my brain, not gonna do something like that. My brain, like, and I just think about like how I grew up, especially how I grew up in music. And I got really lucky that I had piano lessons when I was really little, like 7 years old. And the stuff that I got, my music teacher was vicious. Like she would know if we were using the wrong finger, and everything just had to be such a particular way. And I hated it. But then I got older and it all is still there, like with so much clarity. And even if I don't practice for like 5 years, I can rediscover it because it was put in like pedagogically correctly. And I couldn't have understood the necessity of that through my whole younger life. But now that I see it, I'm like, oh, fuck. And then especially too, like how bad it is for our whole generation, especially of like BIPOC musicians, to be like, oh yeah, we're making albums. Like, we're gonna get big on this thing that's moving now. Like, it's like, what? Like, it's cool too. And I don't also have like think that like BIPOC musicians or anybody shouldn't participate in any kind of thing, but it's just like the there is a reward that also comes from the work that is like the pure music work. And it would just be so cool to start to inspire some of us who are working from our family's traditions to like not sell them. And this comes back to the K-pop thing too, right? Where like mothers put the music in their children, you know, like on some level. And like music is protected by families because family units are capable of doing things like protecting musical institutions, because like people don't go into families and record their shit and spread them out everywhere. But when they do, that's when you get like the Jacksons or something like that, right? Where you have true to God, like what do we know? What is Jackson? Jackson is the name of a European landowner. Who is this family? Like, what is the lineage? What is the cultural lineage being held here? Like, why are all the children born with an innate ability to sing like they're from heaven? Like, we already know that in that family traditions carry lineages. Like, we know that in European society it's the same way. Like, we just have no. Oh yeah, sorry. Back to the thing about the kids, and that's why they go for the kids, because the kids will sell your family's lineage, because they don't know yet, right? They don't know that like you shouldn't let somebody take all of your publishing on the songs your grandma taught you, because you'll hit a point in your life where you're like, I want to give those to my kids, but it's actually too late. And where is the consent in actually the history of recording? Like, you actually, all you find is great artists being like, fuck, I tried so hard, they took everything. Universal Music never sold Kanye his masters back to today. They won't give it to him. And also, okay, I'm just gonna continue the thought. Kanye West then posted a screen cap on his Twitter of him sending a text message to the CEO of the Vivendi Group. And the Vivendi Group is like this fucking giant money conglomerate that owns Universal Records. So I looked into this Vivendi Records thing, or Vivendi Money, whatever. And it was started by Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew. Yeah, straight up Napoleon Bonaparte. Like, go anyone go look this up, because it's real. I can't even fucking believe this shit. Somebody call me on the phone and tell me I'm wrong. But and so they own Universal Music, which means that like they own the masters to like literally all of this American indigenous music. Yeah, sorry. I'm gonna try to do this right now too, because I hope I haven't embarrassed myself. I know I haven't. I looked this up. Vivendi Group. Okay, Vivendi Group. It brings up all these fucking companies in this media conglomerate, right? And it's like, what the fuck? Like, any one of us is out here. We just want to make songs. We love our community, like we were talking about at the beginning. What's Napoleon III? Yeah, on December 14th, 1853, a water company named CGE was created by an imperial decree of Napoleon III. I click on this guy, Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, 1808, 1873, the first president of France. Nephew of Napoleon. I'm not wrong, I'm right. That's fucked. There you go. What the hell? What are they doing? What do they want with everyone's songs? And they won't give them back to Kanye. So you just know that there's something way bigger here than money or like industry.
Can you explain like how Kanye has his masters at Vivendi? Like,
oh yeah, like how he doesn't own his masters anymore.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And so, okay, so in this thing called mechanical royalties, they're split into two pieces. One is the songwriting and one is the master. So if you make a sound recording, you have to like record something that somebody wrote. And so somebody owns the actual song itself, and then somebody owns the actual master, right? And so pretty much anybody today making a record that wants a record label to release it, you'll sell your master to them. So they'll own the percentage of your royalties that come from your master, which is 50% of your royalties. And why do artists sell their masters or like not own their masters to begin with? To get into a recording studio costs you like $1,000 a day. To get into a recording studio that Kanye West is in costs you like $20,000 a day. So to make those records that they make, they cost a lot of money, and they don't upfront any of that money. So that money is fronted by these crazy gangsters who own tons of, they're like, what their goals are, nobody knows. And they make decisions by moving money around. about who gets to make what and when. And the thing is like the minute that, so however much it costs Kanye to make Graduation, College Dropout, let's say, you know, they own his masters for life, which means that every single time it's played on the radio for life, he won't see the 50% of it. It won't go to his children or his grandchildren. And that's, and again, we're talking about the strongest artists in music today. So you can be sure that everybody else who's your fave is like, doesn't own their own publishing, unless they're an independent artist and they do. But if you haven't sold your publishing or your master, why would somebody market your music for you? Like the reason that they market everyone's music is because they're making the money. And so again, too, part of the only reason I really want to get back into this is because it's like, why is this all about contracts and shit? Like, who the fuck consented to that? Any of the creators of music? Any of the tradition holders? Like the people who came in with the contracts, do you think they can play a C major scale? Who told you? Who told you that contract work? Like, you can't just come here and make up that you own some shit. Like, don't have the authority to do it.
And are these recordings just like on their mega computer? Is that?
Oh, well, like, I mean, so they'd probably be on physical tapes, but it's not really that Kanye wants to get his tapes back, although I'm sure he does. It's that he doesn't own the rights to his masters. Like, he doesn't own them. You know, Prince didn't own the rights to his masters until 2014. And he spent almost every day of his life from the 90s. He changed his name to a symbol. He was like, you know what? I'll do anything to get my masters back if it means that I have to actually kill who I am to get out of this contract. Change my name to an unpronounceable symbol to get my masters back. I'll do it. Toured with the word slave written on his face to send a message to the people who own the, because like I didn't get it either too, and it doesn't really make sense, but like all the money that you make comes from whether or not you own your song or not. Like, and people make tons of money every time, because like they never play your friend's music on the radio. Every time one of our songs get played on the radio, I get like a $100 check or some shit. Like, it's good, really, really, really good money every time your song gets played on the radio. So you know that the Bare Naked Ladies are cashing out still way beyond what your friends are cashing out on, because their shit's still getting played on the radio. But they all gave away their fucking rights because they had no idea what it would mean to own something like your rights for 15 years, right? And I guess, you know how this has to do with me particularly is that I met Glenn Copeland. And that's like part of why I'm doing this talk too. Or like, because I got introduced to a lot of stuff through working with Glenn. But when Glenn made that record Keyboard Fantasies that everybody loves, he made it in a shed on the bank of a lake in a forest that had only one chair in it. He invited Elizabeth over and there was no way for her to sit because it had one chair, a place for one. And Glenn, he didn't go into a recording studio that cost thousands of dollars a day. He recorded under like an Atari computer in the shed on a lake. And so he owned the whole thing, and he made only 100 copies to give to his friends because he's just a regular person making music, living his life. And so then when in the last like year or two, he became like internationally famous and beloved, he had actually never given away his publishing rights to anyone because nobody had ever come asking, quite frankly. So like, it's actually crazy that something that he did 40 years earlier had come back to life to work only for him. And I just think about how far out that is. Like, he never could have expected in his life, ever, even when it happened that he blew up, he was living his like most hermited thing. And then we tried to take him on the road, and it was so freaking weird. And like, it's just funny because that's what you really lose when you lose the rights to your work. You know, if Glenn had given away the rights to his masters in the 70s, when it blew up, there would have been no incentive for him to even think about hustling on his shit anymore. And honestly, like, I found some of the fucking darkest shit out just doing research on the internet. Like, all that hip hop music, like all the samples too. You know how like we always hear about all these artists who get their shit sampled? They're like, I never see any money from that. Because you know what happened? These fucking white dudes in Brooklyn go to all the underground parties with their cool clothes on, hanging out, being all cool, checking out what tracks the DJs are spinning, and then finding out who owns the publishing to the tracks that are getting spun. None of the musicians know this is happening yet. Buying the publishing rights to Honey Drippers, buying the publishing rights to these samp records with the drum breaks on them. Then when hip hop happens, they go and sue all the hip hop artists to get the publishing rights back from these drum breaks that they bought. The drummer who played them doesn't even know this is happening. Someone's getting sued on their behalf so that somebody can take the money because they went and entered the culture to peel the shit out of it. And this comes back to that question about sovereignty, really, which is that we honestly have to recognize that that's what this is about. And like, why everything feels so bad and weird, kind of, because like, it's really weird what happened, you know? And like, I feel crazy talking about it sometimes because I'm just like, if this is real, isn't it nuts that more people aren't talking about it? But here we are.
We're all just like, whoa.
That's good, because I was worried you guys were going to be like, wow, like that's a lot of circular information. I feel like I have to just like take a chance every time and just hope the information comes out right. I think I'm probably like a 70% right to not right ratio at this point.
What's the like mechanism by which like one does receive royalties though? Like, who is writing the check when you get a royalty check?
I don't mean to answer your answer with such a your question with such a circular answer. You guys know the Kinks?
Yeah.
They have this record actually called Lola and the Money Go Round, and this tune on it called The Money Go Round, where Ray Davies is like, he's like, first you give half to Larry, and then gives half to a brother, and then goes half to a foreign publisher, and he just lists off where his royalties are going. And then the chorus is, oh, like how could this happen to me? I thought they were my friends. And so that's the goofy answer. And the true answer is that you sign up for this thing called SOCAN. And SOCAN goes and they hit up everybody to go and collect your publishing for you. If SOCAN didn't exist, you know what you'd have to do? You just have to go and hit up everybody who could ever possibly have played your track and be like, hey, do you have royalties for me? A lot of these like royalty agencies have been set up to like collect your royalties, but I'm like in a particular way the worst person to talk about. I'm sure there's somebody in this group right now who's like, Nick, you know, because you have to sign up for other things too. There's like sounds, and then you have to sign up for them all, and they send you the bits of pieces of money that you're supposed to be owed. But then like you got to know that like half of that money goes to lawyers. Sound Exchange, funny, hilarious. I have to sign up for it. and you just have to it's all these crazy tax forms, and and it makes so little sense. It's so hard to navigate, especially if you don't know like a bunch of young people who have savvy internet. um I wouldn't be surprised if there were people who had made records in the 60s, 70s, and 80s who have mechanical royalties sitting somewhere that nobody is going to go chase them down to make sure they get. It's a really weird kind of vigilance. I'm still not on. If anybody here can help me with that, they should.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just wondering about how like radio stations that are not like big network stations, but that are like, you know, small campus stations, and just like, you know, kids playing like their friends' tracks, or like, you know, some track that they've heard, and like where the money comes from there, because I assume it's not like, you know, some tiny like McGill, like CKUT, like paying royalties every time one of their DJs plays a track. So
You would be surprised. Like all of the DJs have to write down the names of all the tracks that they play. I don't think that you have to pay publishing on like a lot of it. I think also too that there are like particular rules around things like campus radio stations, um, because they fall under the like public, like they fall under like, and again too, like, to be straight up actually with the answer to all of this stuff is like, to me it's just it's like the colonial judge. Like I can go in front of the colonial judge and we can talk at, to no end about the infrastructure that they built for me and my families. But like it'll never fucking make any sense. Like they like, even when I just consider the way that royalties are paid out, like, then when you get your royalties paid out, do you have to pay royalties on the blues? Like, it's just like so interesting when you have a product that you sell, but you don't pay for your resources. You like the whole chain, you know, like the whole flow is just separated. And again too, like if we're going to go and look back through the history of copyright, we're just only going to find the story of Europeans like figuring out how to make sure that, and again too, I'm going to be straight up about my personal conspiratorial feelings about this. Like if that money that was being created from rock and roll stayed in those communities, then America wouldn't be some white supremacist thing that it looks like today. It would be a completely different country, and the history of the world would actually be completely different if they didn't stop that thing from happening. And I have to be right about that, right? Does anyone think I'm conspiratorial?
How? No, I totally don't think you're. I believe that. How do you think like the people now, like young musicians in Toronto, are like signing these contracts? Like, how does that play into it?
I mean, I kind of think it comes back to this whole idea of like where you want the energy from your family's treasure to go, you know? Um I never made a lot of money off of anything that I've done, but the music itself, especially not being thrown into that environment, I've been able to make so much shit happen with just the music itself. And, you know, like money is one type of value, it's just one type, right? And music is this interesting thing because, like, its value is very real. Its value is like very real in a very real marketplace, but its value, even still in that marketplace, is so hard to gauge because one art object that is the same could net anywhere between literally 1 penny and $10,000. being a record, depending on what's carved into it. And I just think it's like a lot of energy has gone into and continues to go into propping up this this extraction industry, this like music forestry thing, where it's just like about cutting down, and nobody's doing the part. I got really lucky too, because I wanted that more than I wanted anything else. Like I wanted to sign contracts, make money, be famous and rich off of music. But I ended up finding a teacher instead who like he only charged us $5 for 2 hours, and he showed up every single week. And he's like internationally famous artist, played drums on the Charlie Brown records. And every Sunday he'd show up, and he was in his 70s. And it was one of those things where we were just all like, what? And he was just heavier with music than anybody I'd ever met. And then you just start to realize that like that marketplace is just it's like the same kind of trap as everything else. Oh, this is the big one too. This whole publishing thing, and what Prince was trying to warn everybody about, which was like, don't sell your publishing. Even if it means that you don't get famous right away, if somebody likes your song in your lifetime, then it's yours. Like, and even if you make 3,000 songs, if everybody only likes that a tiny little bit, that's actually really good for you. So it gives you incentive to work, right? But because none of us were hip to the publishing contract, none of us actually looked at this thing that you agree on when you accept your social media, right? Is the terms and conditions to your social media. They're recording industry publishing contracts. Because what did you do when you agreed to use social media? You gave up your publishing. Because every single fucking hip idea that you have ever had that you published on social media, like they got all the cred from it. They got all the advertising money that comes in. Oh, sorry, that was a question that you asked too, about where does the money come from it? From advertising, from like, and then especially with the campus radio stations and stuff, they're given a certain amount of money from the university that pays like SOCAN for like block licenses, and they're allowed to play like so many tracks of certain things. And like, so that's kind of how the money part goes around. But yeah, again, so you gave up your publishing when you put it on Instagram. Like, if the minute you put it on Spotify, you give up your publishing. It's a publishing contract with Spotify when you put your shit on it. And the publishing contract is this: we keep 99% and you get 1%. And because nobody got hip to what all these artists were talking about, being like, God, I hope we can get to the kids before they give their shit away. But who are they fighting? The artists? They're fighting the media. You know, like they brought the art, and the media took the art from them. Now they're trying to fight the media to get it back, but the media can say whatever the fuck it wants about anybody. Like, how does accountability work in that system versus how does accountability work in music? And I guess part of the really, really tough thing is we're just trying to get sovereignty back. And how do you get sovereignty back? Through divestment. So like, in the same way we're trying to get people to divest from oil and gas, like fucking divest from music industry. Like who won? Who? Justin Bieber's, he's like, I'm dying. Kanye West is like, I'm dying. Nobody won except for Jay-Z. Jay-Z won. He made some evil deals, though. I don't know what they were. He didn't win. I mean, okay, sorry. Why did Jay-Z win? Only because he made $1 billion and apparently didn't like, you know. But even all the other people who made the massive money off of it, the massive money, like Prince, Michael Jackson, like they didn't make it to 60 years old. And actually, if you go back and look at how many of these really, really, really massive tradition holders, like Billie Holiday, Charles Mingus, Charlie Parker, Otis Redding, how many of them lived past 60, you would find that Whitney Houston, Michael Jackson, Prince, very few people made it to 60 years old. And their publishing has made countless people multimillionaires. If we could even just get to like, and the sovereignty thing is a big ask, like a big old one. I don't know about that one, but like, what if we could just get like people to show us where the money went? Like, where did all the trillions of dollars raised from this indigenous practice go? Where? Has to be enough documentation. It's so secretive about it. It's so good at keeping it secret. I can't believe I get to go off about this right now. This is my favorite subject matter. This is still question time, guys.
This is like not related either, kind of, but you said like the experience of touring with Glenn was different. Like how could you describe that? Like in what sense?
I mean, like different for us just in the sense that there was like interest
Right.
in music. And otherwise we had toured like and never had any money, or we never knew if there would be more than 5 people at the place we were supposed to play at. Never know if we were going to make more than $20 in an evening, kind of thing. So that whole thing shifted, and there was a lot of attention. And like we toured Canada actually, and nobody was at our shows when we went. Like we, honest to God, Jeremy's here. We played empty. We played a completely empty show in Edmonton. There was like maybe 2-3 people there. At this gigantic place. I remember thinking like, what the fuck is going on? And then like a few months later, we flew to London, and we just like sold out shows, celebrities. This is stupid. It was actually, and it like all happened overnight. And it was also too, it all happened overnight because they really wanted Glenn to like stand in to speak about like all the shit that was going on in the world, like trans rights, POC rights, elders. And that was really fucking weird, man. Like, it's really weird. Just because it was like, where the fuck did all these people come from? Like, looking for this when they haven't, like, I've been around, they haven't been asking for this for a really long time. And just like seeing how, like, they if they could, they'd create a cultural complex out of your elders. In case you weren't sure, they will. Like, it's really stupid. And just like trying our hardest to keep anybody's work either like just based in community, based in meeting like-minded people, and not in like following, and not in generating like a whole bunch of coins for who the fuck actually knows who. Like, they swooped in so fast and offered us the craziest opportunities, offered Glenn the craziest opportunities in his 70s. And I remember the whole time thinking, like, how the fuck could any of these pan out? Like, it's just like hearing people talk like they're in a fantasy land. And the only like line that I have in this whole documentary that they made about us touring together was me being like, this just feels like it's not, like, shouldn't Glenn just be at home with his wife? Like, this feels like it's unsustainable. Like, and just like, why are we going so hard? And I watched that thing recently, and I was just like, fuck. Like, it's like, yeah, I don't know, it's crazy. Like, it's so hard to even get elders into communities where there are like marginalized people, or like trans youth, or like people who actually fucking need it. because like it'll take everybody and put you on like this insane circuit. And then who is the audience in that circuit? It is absolutely rich white people who are congratulating themselves for being into something else that's hip. And like they can keep doing that. I actually don't have a problem with it, but they like can't. We just like, it's gonna be really another fucking long haul if like all of the hip artists who can speak to our families and like what is up with the colonialism like end up just getting traded into, like none of those people had any like the management around Glenn's stuff or like had any nuanced understanding of who the audience really was. Like it was so tokenizing and but it was the only path in, you know. And it was the thing that I feel the saddest about that is that like honestly in the whole thing, like if Glenn shit had never blown up for him, he would just have continued to live this life that was just of grace, where literally nobody knows that somebody that you don't even know about at all has made the most beautiful thing. Like you don't even need to know, you know, just like the fact that we all need to know and like just like this fucking colonizing globalization of music thing and like nobody even learning their favorite song. Like what's your one favorite song of all time ever? Could you hear it with no electricity from your own self? It's like so worth it and actually not that challenging to like, especially for us as musicians, to like make sure that people have that infrastructure, those kinds of tools and strengths to be like, oh yeah, music is my inheritance too. We're all working with and sharing this thing, instead of it being like about like creating idols who like all end up being abusers at the end of the day, because how could they not be after doing that? And then it's just modeled after the same thing that they've been doing in the music industry. We're just taking the kids, hurting them, and then letting them go to hurt other people, and then blaming drugs even. It has nothing to do with that. Like,
we have a question in the chat from Lou, which was a while ago, and I guess, you know, maybe learning music is part of this, but what would be the next step to divest from corporate driven content in an accessible way, and does it take sacrifices that some like the marginalized can't afford?
oh, actually though, I think they're like the kinds of sacrifices that particularly like make it so that the marginalized like have literally everything that anyone could need, which is just like to make sure that elders have what they need, you know? Like if you want to go in and do music, I was going through and deleted emails from my Gmail recently and found all these emails from my teacher where he was like, hey man, bring me veggies. When I used to work at the veggie stand in Halifax, I used to always like pack a couple bags and run them by my teacher's house. He'd always try to pull out some coins and give them to me. I was like, what? And you know, I mean, just like teachers are real in every type of practice. It doesn't matter what it is, you know, and like this individualism thing that happened because of the colonialism. And like individualism is, it's such a gift because it's so easy to work against. Because you just have to ask somebody else what they need, really. Like, and if you have anything that you got through music, you got it through your own labor, there's no doubt about that. And then like you can give somebody else that same gift. And you know, what is the so-called jazz music is actually just a university. And all of the people that are so-called jazz artists are just the professors. And who was allowed to enter that university? You can absolutely be sure it was people who were marginalized in every aspect in their society. And honestly, the people who were the most marginalized in their society weren't the ones who were given the pathway to money by Columbia Records, but they were given a place in the story of this music permanently. because it's about them as teachers. It's why Sun Ra, it's why we talk about Sun Ra now, even though for 30 years people didn't talk about Sun Ra, because he created an entire generation through the mentorship and through teaching. And honestly, one of the last times I saw my teacher, the last thing he said to us was on a Zoom call like this, because I haven't seen him in real life in years now. It's like 2 years. He was like, man, all my records, like they'll all disappear. They'll all like rot and break down somewhere. And like my only legacy is my students. And he's saying this as an 80-year-old to his students. And he's like, I'm not telling it to you to make you feel good or anything like that. I'm just like y'all are out here working, trying to work the same path that I took, and it's not even there for you anymore. It's over. Like, and you know, to see us try to like renegotiate or like rebuild a world where like some people are gonna make a bunch of money and everybody else isn't gonna make a bunch of money, when the elders looking back were like, the best part that we did about this was just teaching people how to do it. And like just setting up, like if we set up teaching practices instead of bands in a certain way, we would just see like a whole other generation of super strong music happen. And you know, the only reason that we don't see that as being what happened is because you don't know who Alma Julia Hightower is, or Johnny May Matthews, or Mary Lou Williams, because like the names of these great teachers aren't there. You know, okay, there's this person, Alma Julia Hightower, who you can scan the internet for, see what you can find. I haven't been able to find very much, but one thing that goes without a doubt is she taught Roy Ayers, Charles Mingus, Chico Hamilton, Dizzy Gillespie, like some of the biggest names in the history of music. I can't even find a picture of her.
Okay, hey.
Everyone's so good at research, so I'm like, it would be so cool if we could use that capacity to like start to build up and understand the story. But sorry, I just over talked over something.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify my question that was in the chat. So, because I feel like a lot of artists today in marginalized communities are looking to make, like to live off of their work, like whether it is music or like visual arts. And then being marginalized, often you don't have the time to like think deeply about those questions. And then what it creates is like, I just have someone I know who's a trans woman who released a single, and now it's like on all the platforms, Spotify and all of that. And like, so without knowing that it's like against her rights, she's signing them away because like she doesn't have the time to like, I don't know, read, like understand what it means to like be published on a platform like Spotify. And so I feel like all this thinking is not very, like it could easily be overlooked by marginalized folks just because of life being very precarious and like having to deal with other stuff than read books or like read essays that talk about these topics. So that's why I was asking like how to, like what's the next step to make it accessible to people who unfortunately are influenced by like the glamour of wanting to be an idol and like be known and like live off of their art. And then
yeah, oh my gosh, that's the most beautiful question. I'm honestly so happy that you could ask it, because that is like, I'd rather be playing music in a particular way than doing talks and stuff like this, but I really feel like this is important because those questions are the same questions that I had. And at the end of the day too, like, you know, we're going to use all these services. We're going to use social media. We're going to use Spotify. But I just think about how Glenn's example is not the one that, and even like the perspective that I have on Glenn's life is not the one that they're talking about in any of the articles where they write about him, where that like he made this thing just for his small community. He didn't like, where the fuck did this idea of like having to engage in a globalized market to win come from? It's Beatlemania. It's missionary Beatlemania, right? Like, and because also speaking from my perspective as someone who's like tried to enter that market, it's the most abusive thing I've ever done for myself. Like, it's so they don't want you if you're not gonna look a particular way. Like, it's super dangerous if you're already like a person who doesn't, and you're gonna try to push against that. Like, I'll be there for you, and so will a lot of other people, and it's worth doing. But like nobody told, like nobody's telling us sit on your shit with your community, you know? Like, if you make that cool song, that really beautiful track, like get together like a group of queers to memorize the fuck out of it. Memorize it so much that you could sing it 10 different ways, that song you wrote. Because the song you wrote is so valuable. And like Spotify is barely giving any of us the value back. But like, if we weren't letting this shit get sucked out of our communities, these songs would literally work in our communities like they're supposed to, right? And like, I again go back to thinking about like even just how much meeting Glenn and having that experience has finally taken that pressure off of me, where like I have so much music that I have never released. I have so much music that I have released. And most of it that I've released, like it's really hard. You have to pay money. Like with aquaculture, we had to pay like $4,000 to get like 2 little write-ups in the newspaper. Like, it was humiliating. it's a and then again, like, just, you know, seeing marginalized artists like try to move down that path, the gate is money. Like, if you want to get talked about, they're going to make you pay. Everybody pays to get written about in every one of those major publications. Like, and so that pathway, which we're all being told to take, like, you never actually get to juice your song like it's a grapefruit. Like if you and again, like, our ancestors have all been doing this for forever. You sit in a circle, you come up with your song. Oh, yo, and also if you teach your song to one friend and they know it, they actually know your song, could sing it back to you, it could change both of your lives. Like, that's what music does. That's how it works. Like, that's real shit. Like, and then just I'm watching everybody too work like totally isolated, work all alone, create their avatar. Like, this is who I am. And it's like, if you look at the history of music, that shit is Beatlemania. Because before that, like, did Louis Armstrong do that for himself? Did Mary Lou Williams? Did Billie Holiday? Did like what? And like, what the one thing that all those people had in common is that they wanted to be respected and treated like a dignified artist. And that's, I think, the thing that we all want, you know, especially us as marginalized folks working in this. Like, I don't think a lot of us want to be known by a lot of people, because like evil eye shit on the most basic level. But like, I think a lot of us just want to either belong or be able to like activate this tradition that we know we're a part of. And it would be so cool if we could start to set up working more locally, because even an audience of 5 people is like, again, I only know this from touring so much and being, every time we would have nobody show up, I remember being so down, being like, oh, no one likes my band, we work so hard and it sucks so much. But then when only like 2 or 3 people would show up, we'd play, no one would talk, everyone was so into the music, and then afterwards we'd all hang out for like hours and hours and hours. And like, the older I got, the less I wanted to do that, the more I wanted to do like big concert. But why? It's like, why are we doing Was that like less wheelhousing answer? Or did that help like a little bit?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. It's Zoom. I don't know how to do it.
It did totally. Thank you so much. And yeah, I need to go now, but this talk was like really amazing. Honestly, I have a lot to think about.
That makes me so happy. Thanks so much for coming.
And
Yeah,
I'm
thanks, Lou.
IG, and I'll like follow what you're, I don't know, doing or your research and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's all very rudimentary, and like it's gonna be. I didn't expect that the whole world would fall apart. So that happening really means that there is no reason for us to replicate like that old shit that was handed to us. Something's about to change like on a total quantum level, right?
Great.
Like,
It is we said that people would finish at 3. But if anyone has like any final thoughts or questions, it's a lot to think about. Like, feel free to ask now.
I can, if anyone's feeling shy, I can pause the recording too.
this is a new club quarantine. Silent disco. And also, if anybody has any question, and oh, are we dancing to the music, Laura? What? That's way too cool. If anybody does have any questions or anything like that for me in regular life, you can definitely hit me up on Instagram. Or contact anybody for any of my info. I'm also like down if anybody's into organizing or thinking further about like what to do now, kind of. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. The ats, right? Hold on.
Let's get some handles flying.
Some handles.
Yeah. Oh, it's like tongue aquatic theme. Oh, that's the
Whoa.
oh god. Oh, cool. Hey, the sun came out also. Did it come